Sam. In a small, dark hotel room in Phoenix, Arizona, Marion Crane was looking at herself in the mirror. She was worried. Her hair was untidy, and she was late getting back to work. "Don't go, Marion," said a voice from behind her. Marion looked in the mirror at the young man who was sitting on the bed. She smiled at him sadly. "I must get back to the office, Sam," she said. "My boss is beginning to get worried about these long lunch hours." "But it's Friday afternoon," Sam said. "I don't see you very often. Can't you stay?" "When we're married," Marion replied, walking across the room to pick up her handbag. Sam jumped off the bed and stood behind her. He touched the side of her face softly with the back of his hand. "Can I see you next week?" he said. "Why?" she said, not looking at him. "For another secret lunch? Hoping that nobody will see us together in a small, cheap hotel room? It's the same every week." She turned to Sam, her eyes shining angrily. And then, suddenly, they softened. "Oh, Sam," she said quietly. She rested her face in his hand as she looked up into his eyes. "Why can't we get married now? I want to be with you all the time. I want to walk along the street with you so that everyone can see us together." This time, Sam walked away. He stood alone by the window and looked down at the hot, dry city. "We can get married when I've paid off all my father's debts," he said. "I only need to pay another $11,000. "And how long will that take?" 2 years, maybe 3. "Oh, Sam," Marion cried, throwing the handbag onto the bed and running to hold him. "I can't wait 3 years. I don't care about the money." She kissed his face, but she was almost crying. "I want to be with you. I'll leave my job. I'll come and work in your shop." "Marion, please. You must understand. I don't want us to be poor when we get married. I want us to be happy. In 3 years' time, you'll be my wife, Mrs. Sam Loomis. I promise." Marion sighed and turned round in his arms to rest her head against his shoulder. "In 3 years, I'll be 29, she thought unhappily. Then she suddenly remembered that she was late for work. She left Sam by the window, picked up her bag, and walked towards the door. "I have to go, Sam," she said again. "I'm late. Mr. Lowry will kill me." Chapter 2. Marion's Plan. "I'm sorry I'm late," Marion called as she hurried into the office. "Don't worry," the other secretary said. "Mr. Lowry's having lunch with a customer." Marion gave the other woman a tired smile and sat at her desk. "Did anyone phone while I was out?" she asked. "Just your sister. She says that she's going away for the weekend." Just then, Mr. Lowry walked in. He was talking to a loud-voiced man in a cowboy hat. Marion immediately looked down and tried to look busy. She knew Tommy Cassidy, and she didn't like him. He was an unpleasant, greedy old man who was always talking about money. Cassidy sat down on Marion's desk and showed her a photograph of his daughter. "She's 18 years old," he said, "and she's never been unhappy." Marion looked at the photograph and then at Cassidy. She didn't like the way that he was looking at her, with his clear, cold eyes and his wet, smiling lips. "She's getting married next month," he said, "and I'm buying her a house." He took a thick packet of money out of his pocket and waved it in front of Marion's face. $40,000, he smiled proudly. "This will make her happy, won't it, Marion looked at the money and smiled politely. "Are you happy, Marion?" Cassidy asked, still holding the money in front of her. Marion wanted to stand up and shout at him, "How can I be happy? I can't get married for 3 years while Sam works to pay off his father's debts. But you're rich. You can make $11,000 in 3 weeks. It isn't right." But she didn't say any of this, of course. She sat at her desk and smiled sweetly. "I think so, Mr. Cassidy," she said. "I hope you are," Cassidy said, putting the money on the desk. "Remember, Marion, money can't buy happiness, but it can stop unhappiness." He walked away into Mr. Lowry's office, but Mr. Lowry didn't follow him. He was looking at the money on Marion's desk and seemed worried. "I don't want that money here over the weekend," he said to her quietly. "Take it to the bank after work." "Perhaps I can take it now," Marion asked. "I've got a terrible headache." "Good idea," Mr. Lowry agreed. "Take the money straight to the bank, then go home and have an early night." Marion put the money into a white envelope, put the envelope into her handbag, and left the office. But she didn't take the money to the bank. A plan was taking shape inside her head. $40,000 is a lot of money, she thought. With this money, Sam will be able to pay his debts. Then we'll be able to get married. Pleased with his idea, Marion went straight home. She put some clothes into a suitcase and drove out of Phoenix. As she was waiting at some traffic lights for people to cross the road, Marion looked at the bag next to her with the money in it. Of course, she was thinking, I can't tell Sam that I stole the money from my boss. I'll have to think of a good story to tell him. Suddenly, one of the people crossing the road stopped in front of her car. It was Mr. Lowry. Without thinking, Marion smiled at him and waved. He looked at her seriously, then walked away. "Oh, no," Marion thought. "Now he knows I haven't gone home with a headache. If he thinks I'm running away with the money, he'll phone the police. I must hurry. If I can get to Fairvale before Monday, they'll never find me. I'll be safe with Sam." It was a long journey. After driving all night across the desert, Marion began to feel tired. She had to stop. She drove off the highway and parked at the side of a quiet road. "I'll just rest for half an hour," she told herself. But she was more tired than she thought. She lay down in the front of the car and slept until the morning. Chapter 3. Bates Motel. Marion woke up suddenly. A policeman with a thin mouth and large dark glasses was looking at her through the car window. Without thinking, she sat up and turned the key to start the car. The policeman knocked on the window and told her to stop. Marion opened the window and looked at him nervously. "Is anything wrong, miss?" the policeman asked. "No. I was feeling tired, so I stopped the car." "Why didn't you stay at a hotel? There are lots of hotels near here." "I only wanted a rest," said Marion. "Why? Have I done anything wrong?" "No, miss," the policeman replied, but he wasn't happy. "Can I see your driving papers, please?" Marion turned away from him and opened her bag. The policeman tried to watch over her shoulder, but he didn't see the white envelope full of money. She hid it carefully under her bag, then handed him her driving papers. He studied them for a minute, gave them back, and, without a word, returned to his car. Marion started her car immediately and drove away. Looking in her driving mirror, she noticed that the police car was following her. She drove slowly so that it could go past, but it stayed behind her. Why's he following me? Marion thought nervously. Has Mr. Lowry reported me already? If he has, I'll have to sell this car as soon as I can and get another one. I don't want anyone to follow me to Fairvale. At last, the police car stopped following her and turned off along another road. About an hour later, Marion arrived in a small town. She stopped at a garage and asked about changing her car for another one. While the man from the garage was looking at her old car, Marion walked out into the street to buy a newspaper. Then she noticed the policeman with the dark glasses. He was standing by his car across the road watching her. Marion didn't look at him. She bought a newspaper and looked through it quickly. Good, she thought. There's nothing in the paper about me or the money. Nobody knows yet. That policeman doesn't know anything. He's just trying to frighten me. She went back to the garage and showed the man the car that she wanted. "Don't you want to try it first?" he asked. "No, thank you," Marion replied. "I'm in a hurry. How much will it cost?" "Your car and $700. Marion went to the washroom and took $700 from the white envelope. She came out and gave the money to the man, who looked at her strangely. Then she jumped into her new car. "Just a minute, miss!" Marion's heart jumped. She looked round quickly, but it was only another man from the garage. He was carrying her coat and suitcase. "You left them in your old car," he explained, putting them in the back of her new one. As Marion drove away, the policeman crossed the road and stood next to the man from the garage. "Did she seem strange to you?" the policeman asked. "Very strange," the man agreed. Marion drove across the desert all day, then up into the hills. As it got dark, it began to rain. Tired and hungry, she looked hard through the window for somewhere to stay the night. She couldn't see anything in the heavy rain. No lights along the road, no other cars. I think I'm on the wrong road, she thought. If I turn round and find the highway again, I'll soon find a place to stay. Suddenly, as she was looking for a good place to turn the car, she saw a light by the side of the road. At first, she thought she was dreaming. A hotel here, in the middle of nowhere? Impossible! She closed her eyes and opened them again. Yes, it was true. A small sign shining in the night. Bates Motel. I don't believe it, she said to herself as she drove towards the sign. This is my lucky night. Chapter 4. Norman. There were no other cars outside the motel, and the office was empty. Marion stood outside the office and waited. Looking up, she saw a large old house on a hill behind the motel. On the first floor of the house, she could see a light in a window. There was a shadow moving behind the curtain. The shadow of a woman, Marion thought. She went back to her car and waited for someone to come. At last, through the darkness and the rain, she saw someone outside the house. It was a man, and he was running down the hill towards the motel. Marion got out of her car to meet him. He was a young man, tall and thin, with a friendly, boyish face. "I'm sorry I wasn't in the office," he smiled. "Do you have a room?" Marion asked. 12 rooms, all of them empty," the young man laughed. "You're wet. Come into the office." Inside the office, the young man watched her carefully as she wrote her name in the visitor's book. Not her real name, but Marie Samuels. Then he thought for a second before choosing a key from the small cupboard behind the desk. "Room 1, he smiled. "It's next to this office." The young man carried Marion's suitcase from the car, and she followed him into her room. He turned on the light and opened the window. "It's small, but it's comfortable. he said. "And look, there's a shower in the bathroom." "Thank you, Mr. Bates," Marion smiled. "My name's Norman," he said. "If you want anything, I'll be in the office." "I just want to sleep. But before that, I need to eat." "There's a restaurant about 10 miles away, outside Fairvale. But I was just thinking," he said, lowering his eyes with a shy smile. "It's a long way to Fairvale, and it's still raining. Maybe you'd like to have dinner with me instead. Nothing much, just bread, milk, and cheese. But you can come up to my house with me if you like." "You're very kind," said Marion. Norman looked up, his eyes shining with excitement. "I'll be back when everything's ready, with an umbrella." Marion closed the door behind him and smiled for the first time in 24 hours. What an amusing young man, she thought, just like a little boy. But she was tired, and she had important things to think about. The money, for example. Marion looked round the room for somewhere to hide it. There wasn't much furniture. She decided to put the envelope inside her newspaper and leave it next to the bed. While she was doing this, she heard a loud voice. It came from the big house on the hill. She went to the window and listened. It was the angry voice of an old woman. "No, you can't bring strange young girls up to this house." "Mother, please," Norman replied. "First you bring them up to the house, then what? Music after dinner? Holding hands and kissing?" "Mother, she's just a stranger. She's hungry and it's raining." "She's not having food with my son in this house. Do you understand, boy? Are you going to tell her, or shall I come down and tell her?" "Shut up!" Norman cried. "Shut up!" Then everything was silent. Chapter 5. Mad Things. Marion heard the front door of the big house as it closed. Moments later, she left her room and met Norman, who was standing nervously outside her door. "I made trouble for you. I'm sorry," Marion said. "No, it's my mother, that's all. She isn't well today. I'm sorry. I can't take you to the house. I've taken the food into my office. Would you like to come in there?" Marion followed Norman into a small room behind his office. It was a strange room, full of old clocks and stuffed birds. Norman watched her quietly as she began to eat, then said, "You eat like a bird." "Do you know a lot about birds?" "I don't know much about them. I just like stuffing them." "That's a strange thing to do," said Marion. "I enjoy it." "Is your time so empty?" "No. I'm very busy. I do everything in the office. I clean the rooms. I look after my mother." "Have you got any friends?" Norman looked surprised at this question. "A boy's best friend is his mother." Marion looked at her bread and cheese. She couldn't think of anything to say. The room was quiet. Just the sound of the clocks. "It's stopped raining," Norman said. Marion smiled politely and continued eating. "Where are you going?" Norman tried to start the conversation again. "Somewhere nice," said Marion. "What are you running away from?" This time, Marion was surprised. "Why do you ask that?" "Oh, people are always trying to run away from something," Norman replied. "But people can never really run away, can they? Sometimes, when my mother talks to me like that, I want to run away. But I know I can't. She's ill." "She didn't seem ill to me," said Marion. "I mean ill in the head," said Norman. My father died when I was 5. She was alone with me. Then a few years ago, my mother met this man. She loved him. I think she loved him more than she loved me." Norman's eyes darkened as he looked past Marion at the wall. "When he died," Norman said slowly, "and the way that he died, that's why my mother became ill." Marion felt sorry for Norman then. He was like a lost child, spending all his life in a small motel with his mad mother. "Why don't you leave here?" she asked him. "If you love someone, you don't leave them." "Then why not put her somewhere like a hospital, you mean?" Norman looked at Marion angrily. "A hospital for mad people?" "I'm sorry. I didn't want to be rude." "My mother isn't mad," Norman said, his eyes still burning. Then suddenly, without warning, he became calm again. He smiled. "I know," he said in a soft voice. "I just hate thinking about it. My mother really isn't dangerous. She doesn't hurt anyone. She just does mad things sometimes. We all do mad things sometimes, don't we?" His eyes met Marion's, and he seemed to look straight into her heart. "Don't you do mad things too, sometimes?" "Yes, sometimes," Marion smiled. She thought about the $40,000 in the newspaper in her room. She did a mad thing yesterday afternoon when she put Tommy Cassidy's money in her handbag and ran away with it. "I must take it back," she thought, "tomorrow morning." She stood up. "Thank you for the meal," she said to Norman. "I'm tired, and I have a long journey tomorrow. All the way back to Phoenix. You see, I made a bad mistake. I want to go back and put everything right before it's too late." Norman gave her a warm smile. "I've enjoyed talking to you," he said. "I'll bring you breakfast in the morning." "You'll have to be early," Marion said. "I will. Don't worry," Norman replied. "Sleep well." Chapter 6. As Clean as Snow. Marion went into her room and sat on the bed. "Yes, it was a stupid idea to steal that money," she thought. It was like a bad dream. Now, after talking to that strange, sweet young man, she was awake again. "I'll take the money to the bank first thing on Monday morning," she thought. "Nobody will know what I've done. Everything will be all right." She stood up. She suddenly felt very strong and happy. She felt wonderful. "After I have a shower, I'll feel perfect," she thought. "I'll be as clean as snow." She took off her blouse, her skirt, and shoes, and threw them onto the bed. She didn't realize that someone was watching her. There was a hole in the wall between Marion's room and the one behind Norman's office. Norman was looking through the hole, watching Marion as she undressed. Before going into the shower, Marion suddenly thought of something. She sat down at a small desk and wrote some numbers on a piece of paper. "I spent $700 of that money today," she thought. "I must try to pay that back. But that isn't important now. I'm too tired to think about money. I want a shower." She walked into the bathroom and threw the piece of paper into the toilet. Then she took off her other clothes and got into the bath. Pulling the plastic curtain behind her, she turned on the shower. It was lovely, beautiful and warm. She closed her eyes. The warm water washed down over her body. The bad dream was over. She was becoming a good, clean girl again. Marion didn't hear the bathroom door as it quietly opened. She didn't see the old woman who was slowly crossing the floor. She was facing the wall when the woman's hand pulled the plastic curtain open, She turned quickly and could see, through the water in her eyes, a face. A terrible white face with long gray hair and mad, shining eyes. And above the woman's head, in her hand, there was a large silver knife. Marion screamed. The woman laughed and brought the knife straight down into her neck. Marion went on screaming as the knife cut into her arms, her throat, her stomach. She tried to fight, but the old woman was too strong. The knife cut deeply into her body again and again and again. Marion became weaker. Her screams became softer. Finally, with a small, strange noise at the back of her throat, Marion dropped to the floor of the bath and lay perfectly still. Water was falling into her face, into her beautiful, frightened eyes. It washed down over her body, red with blood. Marion Crane was dead. Chapter 7. The Swamp. Norman felt sick when he saw the blood on his mother's clothes. "Mother! Oh, God! Mother!" he cried. "Blood! Blood!" He ran down the stairs from his mother's bedroom, out of the house, and down the hill to the motel. He couldn't believe it. His mother a killer? It wasn't true. But when he finally ran into the girl's room, he saw that it was true. The girl was lying in the bath with her eyes still open, dead. And his mother was the killer. He stood outside the bathroom, feeling sick and afraid. He tried to think, but he didn't know what to do. He thought about calling the police, but then stopped. He mustn't call them. Not now. Because his mother wasn't really a killer. She was sick. You were not a real killer if you were sick in the head. No, he must stop people from knowing. He had time. The girl was alone. Nobody knew she was there. The best thing to do was to throw away the body. But how? Then Norman had an idea. He turned off the bedroom light and the shower in the bathroom. Then he took the plastic curtain from the shower and opened it out on the bedroom floor. Next, he took Marion's body out of the bath and pulled her slowly onto the plastic curtain. After washing the blood from the floor and walls in the bathroom, he picked the body up inside the plastic curtain and carried it out to her car. He went back to the bedroom and put everything that belonged to the girl inside the suitcase. He put that into the car with the body. He looked round the room one last time. He saw the newspaper next to the bed, picked it up and, not knowing about the money inside it, he threw that into the car too. Then he got into the car and drove away towards a swamp not far from the motel. When he arrived, he got out of the car and pushed it into the swamp. He watched nervously as it slowly went down. It took a long time, but finally it disappeared. Norman smiled. "Mother's safe now," he thought. "Nobody will ever learn what happened to the girl."